It's a cold winter's afternoon, but not too cold. The birds are excited. The trees haven't moved. I'm still here. You're still watching. That's the end of the video. No. Look, we've reached an interesting time, culturally and socially and politically. And I think people can feel with the end of Reconciliation Week, I think people can feel there's a new air of freedom in the air. The freedom to pursue agendas which are important to everybody. COVID-19 is now endemic. You're either vaccinated or not vaccinated. The issue is that, like influenza, it'll be part and parcel of everyday existence, and the price we pay will be an individual price. And obviously the older you are, the sicker you are, the greater the potential price you will pay. At least with vaccination, we are in a position to deal with the worst excesses. Obviously, those people who are not vaccinated have made that choice. That's their decision. And obviously, over the next few years, everybody will catch COVID-19. So what's happened is, during the intervening 2 years, many issues have been put aside because people haven't had the time or the social interaction to pursue those issues. And with the election of a Labor government federally and a Labor government in most states, now is the time that we push that agenda to the left. When I talk about pushing the agenda to the left, I'm talking about pushing the agenda towards social inclusion, pushing the agenda towards using the Commonwealth for the common good, using the time to push an agenda based on direct democratic principles, not representative democracy. So for far too long we have let people who divide us lead us and set the cultural, social and political agenda. It's now our turn. Every dog has its day, and it's now our day. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about things like an anti-privatisation agenda. Governments of all hues have been pursuing privatisation through direct sale and through so-called public-private partnerships, which always assist the private sector to maximise their profits. So we need to fight back regarding an anti-privatisation agenda. A classical example of a Labor government which is in love with privatisation is the Victorian Andrews-led Labor government. They privatised the Port of Melbourne. They've privatised sections of Vic roads. They are thinking about privatising the Transport Accident Commission, and the list goes on and on. They privatised the Titles Office. It's part and parcel of their agenda, although they call themselves a Labor Party. Obviously, they're nothing more than an alternative Liberal Party. For far too long, people have been keeping the gloves on because they're concerned about the alternative. And obviously the alternative is much worse. But the fact that now we have a federal Labor government in for the next 3 years, and we have state Labor governments in most states in this country, means that the time has come to take those gloves off. Because if we don't, nobody else will. So I'm talking about an anti-privatisation agenda. Another agenda which we need to look at is an anti-corporatisation agenda. For far too long, we have allowed corporations to dominate most aspects of everyday life in this country. You may find this hard to believe, but 2,000 of the private general practitioners that exist in this country work for one private company. 80% of grocery sales go through the fingers of 2, possibly 3 dominant corporations. Hardware, 90 to 95% goes through one particular company, and the list goes on and on. I mean, corporatisation ultimately is bad for everybody. So we need to pursue an anti-privatisation agenda, we need to pursue an anti-corporatisation agenda. Then when it comes to the climate emergency, we don't need to beat the drum of green capitalism, private investment for private profit, where the climate emergency has been sold as an opportunity to make money. It's not an opportunity to make money, it's an opportunity to address serious issues that have profound consequences as far as the planet and human beings and every other life form on this planet will experience if we do nothing about it. And one way to look at this is not to create huge, centralised, corporatised energy production facilities, but have decentralised, community-owned, or community public partnerships with governments to ensure that there is energy sufficiency through these community-owned, decentralised energy production sources. Obviously, there will be a need for some centralised sources for heavy industry, but the great majority of communities can own their own energy production facilities. And decentralised energy sources means that we are no longer dependent on 1 or 2 corporations to provide that energy. Another thing is public health. Now, for far too long we have seen public health put on the back burner. A classical example is the Victorian Andrews-led Labor government. Now, let's not forget that the Labor Party has been in power, except for 4 years, over the past 20 years for 15 years. And we have seen the gradual deterioration of the public hospital sector. Not just in terms of waiting lists that now extend to appointments with specialists and outpatients, not just waiting lists regarding important surgery, but waiting lists regarding ambulance response times, waiting lists regarding the emergency organisation that takes emergency calls. And to a significant degree we are paying the price of privatisation. Because although you may be in a public hospital, you may be surprised to learn that most of the cleaners, the ward staff, many people in administrations are actually employed by private corporations. For far too long we have allowed the public health sector to deteriorate. The Andrews-led Labor government in Victoria is more interested in digging tunnels, forming private-public partnerships of organisations like Transurban, getting totally involved in public transport, but at the same time forgetting the very important issues surrounding public health, access to public health. Because it doesn't matter how good your private insurance is. The fact is that you have a severe, catastrophic accident, or you have a major illness, 95% of people will be treated in a public setting. So we need to do something drastic regarding the current public health system. So we need a pro-public health policies. The same with public education. For far too long, religious organisations like the Catholic Church and various Protestant denominations, as well as Muslim and Jewish schools, have been receiving huge amounts of federal money and state support. And we see the public system, as far as education is concerned, deteriorate to such a degree that teachers are leaving the profession in droves, although they have spent 3 to 4 years studying to become teachers. It's quite a catastrophic situation where people are so disillusioned, not with the teaching, but with all the rules and regulations that are now being piled on to teachers in order to teach, and the lack of actually facilities and equipment. And if there's one thing the COVID-19 emergency highlighted, was that learning from home is a disaster. And it's a disaster especially for children whose parents do not have the disposable income to send them to school and provide all the necessary equipment to send them to a public school. I mean, we have the ridiculous situation in this country where we have a private charity asking Australians to sponsor a child to acquire public education. So obviously such a situation cannot be allowed to continue. So we have 4 major issues to deal with: an anti-privatisation agenda, an agenda to promote public health, an agenda to promote public education, an agenda to promote decentralised, community-owned or community-public partnerships as far as energy production is concerned for households. And last but not least, we need to address the looming housing crisis. It's not just a matter of stepping over people who are homeless in the CBD of every city in this country and in many of the suburbs, but it's a real crisis in terms of access to housing. We now have a situation where people will be carrying intergenerational mortgages. We have a situation where a standard 3-bedroom home somewhere in the outer suburbs can cost up to $1 million. We have a situation where housing prices have increased 40-fold since 1980. That's 40-fold, while wages haven't increased at all, possibly 3-4-fold since 1980. So there's a huge housing crisis, and we see governments, and again the Andrews-led Labor government is a classical example, privatising public housing, entering into partnerships with private organisations, some for profit, some not for profit, entering into public-private partnerships with construction companies to create social, affordable community housing, which is privately owned, while privatising what's left of the public housing stock in this state, in Victoria. And if that public housing stock is run down, it's old, it's inefficient, not fit for purpose. Because this is the policy. It's a policy of privatising housing. So you see, public housing is a win-win situation for all sections of the community. It's a win-win situation for a variety of reasons. The first is it provides security for people on low incomes. Not just in terms of them only paying 25% of their income or social security benefits to secure a roof over their head, but security in terms of where they live, security in terms of being involved with local clubs, security in terms of their children having the ability to go to the same school, not moving from school to school to school as rental agreements end. We now have the ridiculous situation where we have billions of Commonwealth money going into rent assistance, artificially increasing rents, and giving money to the private sector. And no money going to public housing. Various states have different positions on public housing, none worse than the Victorian Labor government, so-called Labor government. Today in Victoria, there are very few people promoting public housing. Everybody's got their nose in the trough. Religious-based organisations, privately owned charities, because they know this is one way they can actually finance their particular organisation for entering partnerships with the state government to provide private housing. Public housing should be publicly owned and publicly managed. It's not a matter of just building new housing, it's a matter of spot purchasing across the state to overcome issues. The increasing number of people in public housing, the decreasing need for people to rent privately, which means rents will fall, and as rents fall, investors leave the market at the lower end, and housing prices fall, which allows younger people to enter the private housing market if they wish to enter the private housing market. The privatisation of public housing is nothing more than allowing the private sector to monopolise housing in this country. And it's a significant issue. So now is the time. No longer do we need to watch our P's and Q's and tailor our policies in a way to allow some mildly reformist government to rule us. The Labor Party, to a significant degree, apart from some social and cultural issues, is nothing more than an alternative Liberal party. They have, over the last 40 decades, supported the privatisation agenda. They have supported the deregulation agenda. They have supported globalisation and corporatisation. It is at the very centre of their policies. So it's time that people like you and me, who promote an anti-privatisation agenda, pro-public health, public education, public housing, and decentralised, community-owned energy facilities, start to think seriously about becoming involved, not just in direct action, but more than direct action, than actually standing candidates against the Labor Party in state elections, and there is a state election to be held in Victoria at the end of November, to put forward ideas which will ensure that we use the Commonwealth for the common good. Today, as far as public housing is concerned, $7 to $8 billion will be raised in the next 12 months regarding stamp duty, which is issued when people buy a home. Not only do you have to pay the person who provides the house and the agent, you also pay stamp duty to the state government. And when a house costs $1 million, stamp duty can be anywhere between $50,000 to $60,000, which is greater than a deposit sometimes. So why should this stamp duty be used for consolidated revenue? If this stamp duty was solely used for public housing through spot purchasing programs and building new public housing units, you could house 100,000 Victorians every year. That's 1 million Victorians, that's 20% of the population, could be housed in public housing within a decade, and that would have a profound impact on the private housing market. As I said before, it would decrease rents, decrease prices, increase social cohesion, social security, and everybody would be a winner. So, because we have a Labor Party federally and a Labor Party in most states, in South Australia, in Victoria, in West Australia and Queensland, does not, and the Northern Territory, does not mean the social, political, cultural struggle to share the Commonwealth and to devolve power, to share power, is over. It is just beginning. Join me. Over the next few weeks, I'll be outlining a strategy regarding the Victorian state election.